All right. Hello, my people, my people. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. You know, I adore you guys. And I do this because I like to do this. I have so much fun. I was telling Sam that this podcast isn't so much about me, although I love talking about me and sharing my work. This podcast is really about finding people that inspire me and sharing their stories of joy or recovery or just what they do and how magnificent they are. So, we have a great guest today. Sam is somebody that I just met recently, and he's one of those people that just sort of popped out to me. You know, we were in a group of people, and I'm sure you guys have that feeling where there's a lot of people on a Zoom, and maybe you haven't met anybody, but Sam just kind of went boop, like his face. I had a previous guest, Valerie Shepard, that Sam, you know, and
Yes.
she was one of those people at that time too. And I'm so excited to have both of you as guests on my podcast. So for those of you who maybe haven't seen Valerie's interview yet, it's posted before this one, so go check it out. All right, and to share, I got to put my glasses on. I'm woo those eyes.
Ah.
All right, so this project is brought to you in as a joint venture between the Global Wholeness Clock. So the podcast is a partnership with Earthwalk and Global Wholeness Clock as part of their Wholeness Clock. Earthwalk's mission is to create a global culture of peace, and we are tending to the moment of joy, one of my favorite moments to tend to. And to find out more about the Wholeness Clock and its other shows and programs, please visit their website, earthwalkunited.org/wholeness clock. So thank you. Check them out. And let's come back to Sam. Sam, tell us, introduce yourself. Give me some information about you, where you come from. Just let me know what's going on.
Who me? I'm just a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx.
Sam
I'm a native
Liebowitz. You got Sam
Liebowitz.
Liebowitz.
What
Yeah.
could be bad? But I was kind of one of these kids. I was brought up in my parents weren't really, well, my dad was religious, but my mom wasn't religious. It was more of a typical secular Jewish home. I went to a Hebrew elementary school that was more of a Zionist school, not a religious school. And when it came time for my bar mitzvah, when you're around 13 years old, I said, okay, well, let me see about this religion stuff. Like, is it serious? And I took the classes and I went to the synagogue every day and stuff. But somehow it just didn't sit right with me because, I'd go there on a Saturday and people would drive up in these big Cadillacs. And this was, a conservative synagogue. You're not supposed to drive. You're not supposed to travel on a weekend. You should be walking to the synagogue. And then when some people are praying, they're praying very loudly and making all these big gestures and stuff. And I'm like, why are they drawing attention to themselves so much? And so I kind of, after that whole experience, it just kind of, I felt like there was no spirit in the religion. So I was kind of like, I don't know what the truth is, but I don't think I'm going to find it here. And so I was just kind of open for a long time. And then in high school, I had some like weird experiences that I just couldn't explain. And I remember there was this upperclassman came to me one day with long hair, long frizzy hair, and he's like, "Do you believe in reincarnation?" I'm like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Well, kind of in Western religions, we believe that you have one shot at heaven or hell, and with reincarnation, we have many chances. And it's kind of like you go to third grade and you have to take the test at the end of third grade, and either you pass and you go to heaven, or you fail and you go to hell. But reincarnation is you get to take third grade over and over and over again until you get it right, and then you go to fourth grade, and you take fourth grade over and over and over again until you get it right, and then you go on to fifth grade." And I was thinking about it, I was like, well, that makes a lot more sense to me. And I kind of remember having this thought that if we live in a compassionate universe, which is a big if, but if we live in a compassionate universe, reincarnation just seems like a much more compassionate system than this idea that we only get one shot at it. And so that kind of opened me up. And then in college, I met, a couple of friends and started having this sort of spiritual experience with them. I learned one of our friends learned how to hypnotically regress people, and we were hypnotically regressed to remember some past lives. And my friend's girlfriend, she remembered the life as being an oracle in Delphi, and like
Oh,
after that, she was able to start channeling, and she would channel the different spirits, all kinds of spiritual beings, and it kind of got me introduced and put on my initial sort of spiritual path. However, in the real world, things aren't necessarily so pretty. They can get messy. And it
mm,
turned out that my friend, he was schizophrenic, and like I knew he was different, but I had no idea until one day, when his girlfriend came back from classes, and she was taking a psychology class, and he was looking through the textbook, and he started reading the definition of psychosis, and he was like hearing voices, da 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 da, like checklist. It was like he was a textbook case of someone
wow.
who is schizophrenic for schizophrenia.
And
Textbook case.
self-diagnosed. What, that's a lot of awareness for.
He was super intelligent. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, this guy was like Einstein level intelligent,
Mm,
but his mother was alcoholic. His father died when he was in college. There were all kinds of problems.
mm,
And so we were like, oh, okay. But like, we didn't really, I was a kid. We were all kids. We didn't really understand the implications of that. And so we kind of, figured out like what can we do to support him to overcome it. And then with our own stuff. But what happened was, because we were immature, because we didn't have mentors, because of a whole bunch of things, more and more problems started creeping up. He started getting worse and worse. I mean, I ended up, and none of his relatives would have anything to do with him. His girlfriend came from a very poor family. Literally, it's like I stepped in to help out, and we moved in together, and I was paying the rent, because if I didn't, they'd be out on the street. And I
right.
had so many people at the time giving me a hard time that, oh, they're not your responsibility. What are you doing? They're taking advantage of you, all this stuff. But I knew what I was doing. I did it consciously. Um, but I didn't really know what I was getting myself in for. And after about 6 years, it was just too much for me. And things got so bad, I literally could almost feel my own sanity slipping. And I was like, I have to get out of this situation. And so we had to move out of the apartment, and so him and his girlfriend found an apartment. I left. I actually moved back in with my mom, and for a while, I was still, for a number of years, I still helped him out financially afterwards, but I started being able to keep more for myself and doing things. But then after a while, I was just kind of lost. I was like, so much of my identity was tied up at the time in that experience, that once things kind of fell apart, I felt like the rug had been pulled out from underneath me. And I didn't know what to believe, and I didn't know what was true, what wasn't true. And so I just kind of threw myself into being an entrepreneur, and just, focused on making money and doing stuff I enjoyed. But then, over time, I like to say the universe will have its way with you, whether you want it to or not. And it kind of,
Yes, it will.
and
Absolutely.
so it nudged me here and nudged me there. And I got back into personal development, and I started taking these classes about energy healing and stuff, not because I ever in my wildest dreams thought I would be a healer, but just for my own healing, because I knew I had these emotional scars from the whole situation. And taking one modality after another modality, became a Reiki master, learned the theta healing, magnified healing, all celestial light healing, all these different modalities. And then there was that one workshop
Mm,
where they teach you some modality, they pair you up, and you work on each other. And I remember that this workshop, it was at the hotel airport. It was a very intuitive modality, and the instructor, who was the creator of the modality, he was an amazing healer. He was a lousy teacher. And like, people are there like scratching their head after a couple of days, because he's just reading out of his book and no one's really getting it. And I think I kind of sort of got it. I learned afterwards, much later on, that what he's really doing is he's just saying words to occupy the mind, but really he's doing energy work the whole time to get people to be open and in tune with the energy work.
right.
And And so the second day after lunch, they call for volunteers to come up and demonstrate the method. And so they ask for someone who would like to be worked on. And this one woman, blonde-haired woman, raises her hand. She says, they pick on her and she says, oh, I'm all congested. I feel like I'm about to come down with the flu. I really would love someone to work on me. So she goes up. And then they're asking for someone to try the method on her. And I'm in the back of the room and I'm like, yeah, me. My hand's way up in the air. And they pick on me and I go up because I just wanted to try it out. And so I do the method on her, like 5 minutes tops, 5, 10, not even 10 minutes, 5 minutes tops. And after I finish, I'm like, so how do you feel? And she's like, wow, I can breathe. I go, oh, that's good. She goes, no, listen. She takes this deep breath. You hear that? There's no congestion. I go, oh, that's wonderful. She goes, no, you don't understand. I've been suffering from chronic bronchitis since I was 6 years old in South Africa. I've been able to breathe like this since I was a little kid. And I was like, oh. And then like the metaphorical light bulb goes off on top of my head going like, wait a minute, you mean like this stuff isn't just for me to help myself? I can actually use this to help people. It's like, oh, but I'm like, what do I do with this? I'm like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business guy. Like, what do you do with this?
Yeah.
And
You know,
so
Sam, you're one of those really fun guests because I could just keep letting you talk. I'm so entranced by your story. I love it. I mean, how you started out as this little Jewish boy trying to figure things out and not vibrating with the spirituality that you're, the religion that you're with. God, I absolutely understand that, you know, my family was Catholic and Episcopal, and I was just like looking around going, what is this? This doesn't make any sense to me, right? I am so vibrating with your story and the idea of the enmeshment that you got to understand, that codependence kind of experience that you just got sucked into, not knowing any better. And then coming out of that to this experience of discovering that you actually could implement these healing experiences for people. So that's fantastic. Go on.
so, and by the way, you know, there's a Jewish star in that painting behind you.
I know. So, well, there's also a cross. There's a Jewish star. There's a bunch of sacred
all kinds of
geometry
yeah.
in there. Yeah. There's an angel type of thing going in. There's the rose
I
of the
didn't see the
heart.
angel
There's
before. Yeah,
yeah.
I like the lightning
There's a whole
bolts.
bunch of
Cool.
stuff.
So I'm sitting with this and I'm like, what do I do with this? And I was kind of a business consultant, a coach, and a mentor at the time. And they were like, you're still kind of like a consultant. You're just a different kind of consultant. So I'm one who focuses more on people's consciousness than necessarily the best business strategy. Not that I don't have good business strategies. I have that too. But what happened is my coaching practice or mentoring practice more evolved into one where I used my intuition and my energy healing skills to kind of feel into when someone's stuck and having some problem in their business, in their career, what's the underlying energetic pattern that they're living out? What's underneath all that, that if we can get to that base issue, will not only help the situation, but it'll help all other things in their life as well. And so then that's how I sort of started applying it. And you know, I've studied with spiritual teachers, and was put on a shamanic path about 6.5, 7 years ago. And so I've really sort of taken everything that I've learned and brought it together. And I do my own show as well called the Conscious Consultant Hour. And I've had on people who've read my hand and done my astrological chart and done my numerology. And it's funny how like they all had sort of a similar message, that I have a double life path, that I have my foot in two worlds. And then it all started to make sense. It's like, yes, like I can woo with the biggest of the woo-woos. Okay. Like I can go into the heavy, deep esoteric stuff. But then I also have this skill that I developed when I was doing public speaking and teaching people technical stuff, of how to take sort of very technical or esoteric concepts and translating it down into simple, easy to understand, accessible language so that anybody can kind of get it. And so that's what I realized is sort of one of my gifts and how I work with people is, you know, although I love new age, mystical, enlightened people, conscious people, but also really my talent is working with people who aren't quite sure, wouldn't call themselves spiritual, but they know the regular stuff doesn't work for them and they're just kind of open.
Oh,
And
you
just
are
because
talking to my avatar. Those are my those are my clients. So yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's why
They're
we get
hungry.
along so well. We're kindred
Yeah,
spirits. We're totally brothers. We're totally soul brothers here. And so like those are the people I love to work with, because I can watch them as they dip their toe on the spiritual path and they start finding their way, and it's like so exciting. And they're like, "Oh my God, have you heard about this? Oh, do you know about crystals?" I'm like, "Yeah, I have
yeah.
dozens of them all over my desk."
Yeah, they're right there. Yeah, that is awesome. I love that. And how you had this openness to sort of just explore that sort of seeker archetype, that you were able to just kind of go, tell me more. That is an open heart that some people are just afraid of. Like there's just a lot of people have fear around that. You don't seem to have had any of that.
Well, you know, it's kind of after my experience of living with someone who's schizophrenic, and really having to deal with, working all day long, coming back at night, and he's freaking out over stuff and breaking his glasses and having to talk him off the ledge for hours and getting 2 3 hours of sleep a night and then going up and going to work the next day. I mean, after you've lived that for years, there's not a lot to be afraid of in life.
Right.
And the thing is, like, things always worked out. Like, no matter how bad things got, somehow things always managed. And look, like I remember like being on the edge, being on the edge of being evicted, not knowing how we were going to make rent next month. How to pay bills, how to have enough money for food. All this stuff. I've been there, and
Mm.
I guess just because I trusted, I just said yes to what life had before me, just yes to the next step.
Right.
And
So that spiritual early on spiritual training, it gave you at least a sense of saying yes and trying things. That's, who knows? That's as I mean, I grew up around the Jewish faith. I obviously wasn't Jewish from what I said
Mhm.
earlier, but I grew up around it. And my experience with the faith was so much saying yes, like question, argue, at least be open to what it is. And so maybe that foundation was there for you to actually step forward into something larger or different, right?
Maybe. I don't know, but it's kind of just the way I guess I've always been.
Mm,
I've never been one of those people who had this big, 20-year plan and knew
mm.
that by a certain age I was going to have this and that and the wife and the kids and the car and the white picket fence and all that. Nah, that was never me.
Oh, right there with you, right there with you.
I just
Yeah,
like, who the hell knows?
yeah.
Uh, and now and what's really interesting, talk about my Jewish faith. It wasn't until I started doing this shamanic work like 6.5 years ago that I got introduced to, and the facilitator who I came in from, he was Israeli Jewish. And it was like after that I started meeting all these Jewish people, and I had like very few Jewish friends before. Most of my life I had very few Jewish friends. And because when you were a kid, you grow up inside, it's like the Jewish kids were the ones who tormented me the most, so I never wanted to have anything to do with them. But then from doing like this spiritual work, I started meeting like all these spiritual Jewish people, and now I have like so many spiritual Jewish people in my life. It's so funny. I like never would have thunk it.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. One of my background is in quantum theory and theology, that sort of science, religion, duality, like what you spoke to
Hmm.
earlier. And one of my favorite studies was actually the Kabbalah.
Ah.
That whole Jewish mysticism, that experience, the sacred
Hmm.
geometry, like what you have and what I have going on back here, like this
Right.
whole idea of it's a different way of having faith. Like it's this, I don't know how to describe it, but I loved it. And just I'm glad that you brought that up. I've heard your story before. I've heard it a couple times, and there were things I heard today that were even new and exciting to me. And this idea of learning from your pain is a big part of my life that I always have to go back to. What is this teaching me? What am I learning? It's sort of when I'm going through a difficult time, it helps me step back and get perspective, right?
Mm.
And I see that in your story. You had this childhood, you had the schizophrenic relationships, you had this sense of codependency, overcoming that, learning more about yourself, losing yourself, learning about yourself. To look back, and I guess I'm bringing this up because I want people who are tuning in, who may be going through a tough time, to say, that this experience is going to make you even more powerful. And you're an example of that. This
And it's
experience is going to potentially open your heart to
right,
new
right.
possibilities.
And it's really interesting because I always tried never to regret the experience that I had, even though it was very difficult, but it wasn't always easy to come to grips with. And now, and it was also kind of interesting how I got put back on my spiritual path because it was very gradual. Because like if life had like thrown me back into the spiritual stuff, I would have gone running in the other direction. But because it was very gradual and in a way that really served me, I, I I wasn't afraid of it. And so, and now I see how much that solid foundation I had from those years ago really helped me, not just to, when I got back into it, to pick it up and progress, but to really grow and really make it a part of my life. A- As an example, just when this notion of being the conscious consultant came to me, the first thing I did, I said, if I'm going to do this, I have to be authentic about it. I have to be real about it. I have to let people know. I went to my LinkedIn profile and I put it into my LinkedIn profile right away, like that. And it was like me putting a stake in the ground saying, yeah, like I'm going to be who I am. And if people don't like it, they're going to have to deal with it. I have to be who I am. And it's interesting. I've never gotten any pushback over it. Nobody ever gave me flack about it because they just knew that if they ever said anything to me, I'd be like, okay, it doesn't appeal to you, then go work with someone else.
Mhm. Mhm. And there's a whole market of people that are looking for that, right? I am so some people are very frustrated with being alive at this time, with all the stuff, the upheaval, all the things that are happening, right? And I have been doing my best to step back and to look at this time to see actually this is a shift. And it's been happening. This is a consciousness shift, a global consciousness shift that is happening in the world. And it's being represented by politics and stuff like that. But it's happening in other areas. When I first started my work, I call my practice convergence healing, and it has a bunch of stuff to it. But one
Mm.
of the things that I adapted into my practice was, like you had mentioned, learning, was hypnosis, like that type of work, working on the subconscious level of behavior, right? And I tell you, in the beginning of my practice, I decided I didn't want to have have an office. I didn't want to have
Mm.
a space to go to with my, a couch and all that type of stuff that I had to pay rent on. And I did it for a little while and it just didn't feel right. And I started working out of my living room. And people
Mm.
were my coworkers, my peers were like, you can't do that. That's unprofessional. But I never once had a client tell me that they were uncomfortable in my house.
Huh.
I never once, in fact, when I finally did build out a space on my property where it was still my home property, but I built out an office space to have there, people would say, I really miss being in your house,
Well, you know
right?
what's so funny to hear that is because I live in New York City and rents here are ridiculous. So most practitioners, when you're just starting off, you're not making that much money. You have to start off out of your home because
Mhm.
you can't afford to rent a space. It's more like it's like you do from your home until you get enough clients and make enough money. And it's like, oh, okay, now I can go get a space because I can afford to do it.
Well, no, and interesting enough, my referrals now almost all come from doctors, right?
Interesting. Wow.
16 years ago or more, when I started doing this work, the medical institution was absolutely against any, they were like, that's woo woo. We don't even want to talk about it, that type of stuff. And I think physicians, especially nurses, absolutely nurses, but physicians themselves are kind of going, well, we don't have all the answers, which is a new way of
Yeah.
looking at things from the medical world, right? There's an ego that's involved in it that used to be part of the medical world, that it was the only drugs and surgery, and that was all they knew, that's all they did, and that was the right way to do everything. But they were leaving out the idea that every wound has a spiritual side to it and every wound has
Hmm.
a physical side to it. That
Right.
woman that you did that work with, you weren't working on the physical plane, you were working on the etheric, mental, spiritual plane, heart plane, right?
And it was interesting because what came to me when I was working on her was that she drowned that her and her fiance at the time, and this was like some past life thing, were taking some boat, like, a couple hundred years ago to, I don't know, to America, to someplace, and there was a really bad storm and the boat sank, and she lost him. And that, like she lost him. She was on a lifeboat or something. And so it was that drowning. It wasn't even her drowning. It was the person she loved drowning, but she
Mm.
took that on. At least that's, again, it could be just my imagination, but that's just what came to me when I worked on her. And what difference does it make? If she got better, she got better. You can't argue with the
Absolutely.
results.
No, no. I remember I was doing a keynote talk in Turkey. I had the privilege of being blessed to do that. And it was all through a translator. And I had a woman wanted some work. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'm not just going to talk, I'm going to demonstrate. So come on up, right? Come on down. And through a translator, I took her through the process. And as her arm was frozen, her shoulder was frozen. And as we were talking and going through the process, I do a dialogue with the parts of the body. It's a subconscious sort of tuning in type of dialogue. And as she was going through it, she didn't even realize it. She was sort of doing this with her arm, but it was frozen in the beginning, right? She hadn't been able to move it for several years, and she was upset, and she started doing this with her arm, and the room got silent, and she didn't even realize what was going on. And one of those moments happened, and we all had to wait for her to process that she was just allowing her arm, like her arm was moving. The doctor said it was never we don't know what's wrong with it. It seems to be frozen.
Wow.
It's just the way it is. You're going to have to live with it. She had been living with it for, I think at that time, about 5 years. And then all of a sudden, as we're just going through this sort of dialogue process with this part of her that was stuck, suddenly it started to move, right?
It's so funny. I have a very similar story. I once did a demonstration in front of this dowsing group in New York City of instant energy healing. And this woman like raised her hand, "Oh, work on me. You're not going to be able to help me." I'm like, oh, okay. I love skeptical people. They're always the best ones. So I
Mm-hmm.
do the method. She's like, I said, "What's wrong?" She goes, "Oh, I have this pain in my wrist. I've had it for like 2 years now." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Let's see what it is." And I don't remember what were the corrections or what came up around it, but I'm like, "Okay, how do you feel now?" And she goes, "It's still there." I'm like, "Oh, where did my friend go?" And I look at it, I'm like, "Oh, where did your friend go?" And the whole audience cracked up laughing. Because think about, if you think of your pain as your friend, of course you're not going to let it go. It's always going to be there.
Yeah,
And then suddenly
yeah.
it's like it's gone. And she didn't even realize what she said, but the whole audience realized what she said, and they all cracked up laughing.
That's actually, I do a lot of, but my primary focus has been anxiety and addiction issues, right? That's why I get
Mhm.
mostly doctor referrals, right? And one of the ways that people become comfortable or connected to their addictions, it's their friend. It shows up,
Mm,
it's there, they can count on it. Like they have this sort of, it's a
right,
twisted friendship because it's not a
right,
supportive, loving friendship, but
right.
it's a habituated type of friendship.
But it
And
gives them certainty.
it gives them certainty. Absolutely. I'm going to take a moment because I always like to share my teas. I have our men's blend tea today, guys. You're welcome to go get some at convergencehealingteas.com. This blend is really about blood flow. So it's got all kinds of good stuff for the heart, cinnamon, ashwagandha, all that type of stuff. Super good. And on that note, we are running out of time because I know that you have another event to go to. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about where you are right now. You have this fantastic uh, radio station, basically.
Yeah. So one of the best ways to find me and learn more about me is on my network, talkradio.nyc.
Sam, you are so slick. Look at that. Like,
You like that?
bam. I like that, Sam. Just push that button. Boom.
Oh yeah, I got more. Don't worry. And I do my show. It's called the Conscious Consultant Hour. I do it on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern time, East Coast time, to 1 p.m. You just go to talkradio.nyc, and you can also find out about it on Facebook. We do stream the video out to Facebook, facebook.com/talkradio.nyc. and it's great since the things that have been happening. I have so many new shows on the network. I do my own show, but I also run the network, and I have all these hosts on, and they all support each other and work together, and it's really created a nice tight knit community, and we're always looking for other hosts. So the station is all about empowering, uplifting, inspiring, and educating people. So if you know anyone who fits one of those tunes, that would be a good place to send them. And then what I'm also very excited about is just last November, I launched my first book, Everyday Awakening. You are more powerful than you know. And it's a passion project of mine. It's a combination, a culmination of the best of my blog that I've been writing for the last 6 years. And I started getting so many compliments and people saying, like, oh, it was just what I needed, and really pushed me. So I said, okay, let me put it together. When the pandemic happened, I said in March, I'm like, I'm not going to live in fear. I'm going to invest in something I think people need right now. Pulled together, worked with a professional editor, pulled together 126 of my best essays, organized it into 7 parts. And it's a wonderful book. And I set up a URL. People can go straight to the listing on Amazon. It's everydayawakeningbook.com. And it's really, I've gotten so much praise, and I just want people to be exposed to it, and to read it and to use it as some tools to support them in their daily life.
Well, thank you, Sam. I'm excited to support you and your awesome work. And thank you for sharing your story. It was super fun. And I think it was a story that a lot of people can identify with. So that idea of overcoming and becoming even greater, and follow and trusting. You have an amazing faith, the connection that you have with your own, you can call it your own spirit, your own guides, God, whatever you want to call it. It's just a beautiful way how you speak about that in just this like flowing kind of energy. And I just really appreciate that. So as we close up, I want to remind everybody that this is a joint project brought to you by Convergence Healing as well as Earthwalk's Global Wholeness Clock. And I need to put these on. By the Global Wholeness Clock and its daily moments offer a variety of opportunities such as a global community access to live interviews, health and wellness classes, meditations, live music, art, conscious connections, and relationship building. You can find out more about the Global Clock and the work that they're doing at earthwalkunited.org/wholeness clock. And with that, I want to remind everybody that you can connect with me through my book, which is Convergence Healing, Healing Pain with Energetic Love. You can find that on Amazon and pretty much at every bookstore around, as well as the audio version and the Kindle version. You can connect with me on Facebook at Convergence Healing, on Instagram at Convergence Healing, and on Twitter at Peter Bedard, as well as LinkedIn with Peter Bedard or Convergence Healing. And thank you, guys. I am so blessed to have the opportunity to share not only my work, but these fantastic people. Sam, thank you so much for just being an inspiration. And I just want to say namaste to everybody. And my people, make it an amazing day. Love you guys. Bye-bye. Ciao.